Charles Keith, a wealthy store owner and merchant, withdrew the contents of his safe deposit box and brought those papers back to his store. On April 1st, 1928, April Fool's Day, a store clerk mistakenly threw what he thought was waste paper into the fire. Keith desperately tried to salvage what remained of his stock certificates and securities valued at approximately $45,000. So while some lost significant fortunes in April 1928 by accident, others lost them the old-fashioned way, by force. At the beginning of April 1928, two unmasked bandits pulled off a daring daylight robbery in the quiet village of St. Henry, Ohio. The robbers drove up to the bank in an 8-cylinder Chevrolet coach and then burst inside. They held up bank president William Romer, his daughter Elizabeth, who was acting as cashier, and a single customer. Well, newspaper reports differed on the exact amount taken. Some said $6,000 in cash, while another one reported $9,000 in cash, plus an undetermined amount of negotiable bonds. Either way, the bandits fled toward the Indiana state line, which was about 20 miles away. Portland, Indiana, and area police, Mercer County officers, and Indiana State Police all joined in the pursuit. Lieutenant Hal Ayers learned that the getaway car bore a license tag plate number 530-019, a plate registered to a Henry Larson, supposed to be on his Cadillac. Wells County Sheriff Forrester McLean later found the abandoned car near Petroleum, Indiana. He returned that car back to St. Henry, where filling station proprietor Ed Geltz positively identified it since he had filled it with oil the same day as the heist. Authorities believed that same duo recently robbed the Lynn Grove, Indiana bank as well. Yet, small-town banks weren't the only targets. In the industrialized Northeast, gangsters turned their attention to payrolls being moved by bank messengers through the streets. In the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania suburb of Lawrenceville, 3 armed robbers executed a swift ambush on 2 Ward Baking Company bank messengers. Henry Walker and Edwin Legulon were walking from the baking company to the Franklin Savings and Trust Company when the bandits stepped out of an alleyway. Armed with shotguns, though described as rifles in another report, the robbers shouted, "Hands up," and then backed the messengers into that alley at gunpoint. They seized the money bags, jumped into a waiting car, and escaped. The haul totaled about $15,000. The baking company manager stated that the messengers carried roughly $7,000 in cash and $8,000 in endorsed checks. So while police were busy with car chases and brazen holdups, some crimes had already made it to court. On April 3rd, 1928, 24-year-old Stuart R. Florian of Southington, Connecticut, took the stand in his own defense in Hartford. He faced charges of bank robbery with violence and theft for the June 22nd, 1927 holdup of the Plantsville National Bank. In total, 3 of the self-confessed Cicero, Illinois gangsters, Thomas DeMarco and William Capella among them, had already admitted their roles. Mrs. Raymond T. Olson, wife of the bank cashier, testified that her husband refused to open the safe and stated that DeMarco then threatened to, quote, plug, end quote, or shoot him if he did not. Assistant State Attorney R.I. Gideon argued that Florian had to be the local connection, declaring he was, quote, the only man in Connecticut, end quote, who knew the trio. The defense countered that Albert W. Meyer, gangster number 3, likely wrote the letter that lured DeMarco and Capella, the Illinois gunman, east, not Florian. The Cicero gangsters even claimed the job was planned in collusion with bank insiders, naming Raymond T. Olson and also a teller, George Curtis. After approximately 2 hours and 10 minutes, the jury deadlocked for the second time, with as many as 8 jurors reportedly favoring the acquittal of Stuart Florian. Florian was sent back to the Hartford County Jail in default of a $50,000 bond. But not every underworld dispute ended in court. Some were dramatically settled with bullets, and in this case, for our first time, I believe, a calling card. In a luxurious New York City apartment, a deadly gun battle erupted among surviving members of the Gerald Chapman gang of international master criminals. We covered this story in an earlier video, but to summarize, Mr. and Mrs. Berkowitz, operating under numerous aliases, including Mr. and Mrs. Ike Behrman, fled that apartment shortly before police arrived. Officers entered and found a small dog cowering in the corner and an electric piano playing Blue Heaven. The apartment contained over 300 telegrams and cablegrams from European and American criminals, also safe-blowing tools, and a bank book from Muncie, Indiana, which had been the headquarters for Gerald Chapman and his ally, Dutch Anderson. The victim of the gun battle, who had been shot through the heart, was Will Doyle, known as Doll. He was a gang spotter who located safes to crack, homes to raid, and fences to be the middleman for the stolen property. Well, after botching a movie theater job and complaining that his share was only $100, Doyle broke what seems to have been the gang's most strict rule by physically showing up at that apartment in person. He waved a roll of $1 bills and then threatened to squeal. Someone, likely Mr. Berkowitz, shot him and then left a chilling calling card, a roll of $100 bills pinned over Doyle's heart with a pistol bullet. The couple then vanished, abandoning everything, including their dog. And so we go from now a sophisticated international ring of master criminals to the more mundane stick-up. Well, on April 3rd, 1928, 2 or more bandits ambushed 2 guards and a bank messenger from the Riverside Trust Company, only feet from the West Jersey and Seashore Railroad Station in Riverside, New Jersey. As passengers prepared to board commuter trains, the thugs pistol-whipped 70-year-old guard John Cunningham until he finally released the bag containing over $4,000. So this range of crimes from pistol whipping to international rings and everything in between left judges and lawmakers still searching for solutions. And in the midst of what seemed to be a surging crime wave in the first quarter plus of 1928, Judge Joseph Buffington of the United States Circuit Court of Appeals made a startling recommendation just before a conference of over 200 judges. After reviewing conditions in New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, which comprised or were at least part of Circuit 3, he pointed to Delaware's success. Quote, "Professional bandits knew that if Delaware found a person guilty of robbery, that in addition to imprisonment, he could receive between 20 and 40 lashes," end quote, according to Buffington. An editor of the Springfield Weekly Republican called it, quote, "Delaware's peculiar and famous institution, the whipping post," end quote, noting that the threat of the lash drove criminals away from Delaware, just as the Baum's laws, which we've covered numerous times in the past, had pushed them out of New York. In Pittsboro, North Carolina, 13 men went on trial for running an automobile thievery ring and was considered one of the most complicated cases on the North Carolina court record. Officially, the 13 were charged with criminal conspiracy, larceny, and receiving stolen automobiles in Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. One of those charged was Bill Payne, who had recently been sentenced to the state prison for his role in the robbery of the Bank of Norman in Norman, North Carolina. Payne was nolle prost, which was slang for nolle prosequi, which means the prosecutor stopped pursuing criminal charges for some reason, but the charges weren't dismissed, and it certainly did not mean that the person was innocent. Interestingly, Bill Payne was just brought to my attention by a regular viewer as a character to keep a lookout for. Now, at this point, we have Bill Payne in the state prison in North Carolina, but based on the viewer's input, I suspect he's going to be getting out of prison somehow and returning to his wild life of crime. So from fortunes being burned accidentally on April Fool's Day to cold-blooded gangland killings with a calling card, and the good guys, the citizens, calling for the use of the lash, April of 1928 showed just how prevalent the gang underworld had become. Bank robberies were skyrocketing. Gangsters grew bolder, and the public was demanding action. Next time we head to the Chicago, Indiana area where that same violence and gangster mayhem was reaching dramatic new levels. The Midwest was about to get a lot more violent.